It's actually incredible, and we've lost count of the number of times the Russian side, whether it's the Russian foreign minister or the Kremlin spokesperson, have invoked the idea of World War III and nuclear war. Some believe that every time the war isn't going the way they want it to, the Russians invoke the idea of this becoming World War III as a kind of muscle flex. But this time, the Russian foreign minister has done it again. He's wagged a warning finger at the West and said, don't misjudge the possibility of World War III, which he has said previously will by default mean a nuclear war.
Risk of a nuclear war is very, very significant and should not be underestimated, warns Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. As the Russia-Ukraine war enters day 62, with Ukraine successfully stalling the Russian forces for over 2 months with NATO weapons, the Russian foreign minister accused NATO of engaging in a proxy war, supplying sophisticated weapons to Ukraine. Lavrov, in an interview to the Russian state television, accused the United States of trying to weaken Russia. I would not want to elevate those risks artificially. Many would like that. The danger is serious, real, insists the Russian foreign minister. This, of course, is in stark contrast with the Russian foreign minister who had told India Today in an exclusive interview in Moscow, where he accused the West of raising the nuclear bogey.
As a P5 member, as a nuclear power, will nuclear be an option at all? Is it on the table at all?
When the Soviet Union and the United States in 1987, Gorbachev and Reagan decided that they have special responsibility for peace on this planet, they signed a solemn declaration that there could be no winners in a nuclear war, and therefore nuclear war must never be launched.
Russian President Vladimir Putin had reviewed a military exercise of Russian strategic defense forces, seen as a signal to the West not to get involved in Ukraine. NATO supplying Javelin anti-tank guided missiles, S-300 missile defense shield, Switchblade drones, long-range artillery and ammunition has been described by Lavrov as provocative measures calculated to prolong the conflict rather than end it. NATO, in a sense, is engaging in a war with Russia through a proxy and is arming that proxy. War means war. Lavrov was quoted saying, Moscow's assessment is that Washington, D.C. wants to see Russia weakened, and the nuclear threat is aimed not only to dissuade NATO from arming Ukraine, but also to prevent Finland and Sweden from joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
The conversations again about Finland and Sweden joining or becoming a member of the NATO, there is conversation in Russia and clear message to the world that should there be an existential crisis to Russia, they would be looking at nuclear, but that only if their existence is under threat. In Moscow, Geeta Mohan for India Today.
And I also want to tell all of our viewers that Gaurav Sawant, who has been fronting our coverage from Ukraine, is back. Good to see you back in the studio, Gaurav. He's had a first-hand view, the first Indian journalist in Ukraine. He's traveled all across the country, and I can tell you very frankly that I don't think there's a better journalist, or anyone for that matter, to have a better perspective on whether what Russia is warning right now could actually turn out to be true. But let's first take that claim and put it to the test. Basically, Russia now says that what's happening in Ukraine could unfold into World War III, and the West should not misjudge the possibility of nuclear warfare. Now, there's no formal definition of world war, but we can put some reasonable criteria for what a world war should have in terms of features, and let's try and apply them to what's happening on the ground. Criteria number one must involve all major powers. What's happening in Ukraine definitely fits the bill, because every large world power is definitely involved, either directly or indirectly, from Russia to the US, to Germany, France and Britain, and also China, which has been assisting Russia. Moving on to criteria number two for what a world war should basically be about, must involve large parts of the world. It does not fit this bill. So on this criteria number two, Russia's claim of World War III actually fails, because the theatre of action is only in Ukraine. Which brings me to criteria number 3, is that any world war must involve multiple theatres of combat. Once again, in this criteria, Russia fails, because the theatre of combat is only inside Ukraine and just around the border areas. There's nothing happening in any other part of the world except for the Black Sea. Criteria number 4 must involve economic blockades and sanctions. Needless to add, it's been happening in a very aggressive way between the US and the United States, also the European Union and Russia. Those sanctions are definitely happening. So criteria number 4 is certainly met. Criteria number 5 must include closure of airspace. Once again, United Kingdom, EU, Canada, the US, they've all shut their airspace to Russia. So this is seen as hostile action by Russia. So criteria number 5 is definitely met. And finally, criteria number 6, which is heightened nuclear readiness. Once Russia put its entire fleet or its entire arsenal of nuclear weapons on operational alert, NATO's nuclear power, which is the UK and France, and of course the United States, put their nuclear weapons on a state of high alert as well. So about 3 out of 6 criteria that we've listed to define what a world war should look like have been met. That's not good news. That's actually slightly troubling, because Russia is a superpower. It's a country which owns the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons on earth at this point of time, and they repeatedly, Gaurav, talk about the possibility of World War III. Geeta Mohan also joins us from Moscow. Gaurav is with me here. Geeta has been just out of an important meeting that Putin and the Russian foreign minister have held with the UN Secretary General, who happens to be in that country. But Gaurav, I want to start with you. World War III is what the Russians are calling it, saying that this could explode into. We've just done a kind of very clinical check of where things are at. At this point of time, it's nowhere close to being World War III. But you've been in the combat zone. You've seen what's actually happening down there on the ground. Is this muscle flexing by the Kremlin? Is this, a team Putin, making these big statements because things are not going their way? Or is there a real possibility that this could become another world war?
So, Shiv, this is serious escalation that the Russian foreign minister is talking about. This is very serious signaling going out to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries to back off, even on weapons supplies, because now in no uncertain terms, Russia is telling the United States and NATO, stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. This is seen as serious escalation. And Shiv, the apprehension is that the next phase of this battle could well be with Finland and Sweden talking about joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that would mean nuclear weapons come into play.
Yeah.
Then they are being brandished, and that's a scary aspect of this war. You remember the Russian fighter bombers flying with nuclear weapons, the Swedish media talking about it pretty early in this combat. So in this conflict. So the situation is tense, and this tension is spiraling out of control. And why is that happening? Because NATO, Russia is practically fighting the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries through Ukraine. And Sergey Lavrov has said that in as many words, that this is NATO fighting a proxy war with Russia, using Ukraine as a tool in this conflict. So, Shiv, serious escalation. There could well be a flare-up in case Finland and Sweden join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
So the way things are configured, and I want to come to Geeta now, our foreign affairs editor, who scored that big world-exclusive interview with Minister Lavrov just a few days ago. That set the agenda, in many parts of the world reporting this story. The same minister now talking about the possibility of World War III. As Gaurav mentioned, Geeta, the building blocks of a world war are all placed and ready. And it could take any small little trigger or escalation for things to, go completely out of control. How are you reading the narrative coming out of Moscow of the possibility of World War III, Geeta?
Well, Shiv, like you very rightly said, and use the apt word over here, trigger. We really do not know what the trigger is going to be, but over here, there are many factors at play, and anything could become a trigger. The Russian side, even during the press conference today with Antonio Guterres, Lavrov said the very same thing to our question. He said that we are not averse to the idea of negotiations. Very importantly, he said, one, that even if we look at negotiations, negotiations, the fact that the world and the West has been working, especially the United States of America, in a unilateral manner to corner Russia is not going to go down well with the world and this region. Russia is not going to take it lying down, and like Gaurav said, Sweden, Finland, any sort of trigger, if they join the NATO, could land the entire region, especially Ukraine, in a lot of trouble. We are talking about a nuclear power over here who have, in no uncertain terms, Shiv, said that if there is an existential threat, and Finland joining the NATO could be considered that, if there is an existential threat, then they will not be averse to the idea of using nuclear weapons. Secondly, a very important one, Shiv, in the press conference today, he said that there is a proposal, if you're talking about negotiations, there's a proposal that was sent to Ukraine a week or 10 days ago, but the Ukrainian president was first not aware of it, and that the Ukrainian side has not responded to it. So that's a very critical, important aspect when we're talking about settlements and negotiations and the world war over here. Should there be escalation, the Ukrainian side also have to respond to why is it that they're delaying in responding to the draft that has been sent by Moscow.
Very, very interesting. So, you know, what Gaurav and Geeta, from the Ukrainian side and from, from Moscow, reporting from there and getting the real pulse of what is going on between these two powers, suggests that at this point of time, a World War III appears to be a distant possibility, but everything that could make it World War III is already in place, and that is a scary prospect from any stretch of imagination. Stay with me, Gaurav and Geeta, because whether or not this becomes a World War III, I think the one thing the three of us can definitely agree on at this point of time is that Cold War 2.0 is definitely on. Russia and the United States are once again head-to-head in the biggest way possible, just under the umbrella of an actual combat exchange. Nuclear forces of the global powers are on high alert. The world has been realigned. What does that mean for global geopolitics? And why is it that here in India today, we have insisted for weeks now that whether or not the world gets drawn into an actual military conflict, aka World War III, the Cold War has been on for 2 months and running.
Reverse starboard engine. Right full rudder. Hold back starboard shaft. Hold back starboard shaft.
An iconic scene from perhaps the world's most famous Cold War film, harking back to a time of terrifying distrust. Nuclear hair triggers and a world even just a breath away from intercontinental mass destruction. Cut forward a few decades, and a very hot war in Ukraine has a cloud of the old Cold War all around it. Sit back while we prove to you that we are in Cold War 2.0. Proof 1. Direct US-Russia tension. The first piece of proof, the war in Ukraine has sparked the most high-level tensions between the US and Russia in decades, with both superpowers reviving historic angst to paint each other as global imperialistic aggressors running roughshod over world peace.
Did you ask me whether I would call? Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
Proof 2. Big global realignment. The second piece of proof is the global realignment of the international order. Hugely reminiscent of Cold War pressures, complex linkages aside, the world stands massed against Russia, its ally China, a neutral India, with the United States making it clear to nations that they are against Russia or with Russia. The crisis in Ukraine is visible, crafting a new world order. Proof 3. Nuke forces on high alert. The most tangible revival of Cold War tensions is clear in Russia's move to place its nuclear forces on high alert in the wake of NATO movements to help Ukraine. The move by Putin, explained away as a defensive posture by Moscow, has ratcheted up nuclear tensions to dangerous Cold War levels, forcing other nuclear nations, by most accounts, to keep their nukes dusted and ready too. Proof 4. Biowarfare allegations. The allegations of biological weapons laboratories and experimentation with germ warfare are also typical of the Cold War era crossfire. Russia threw the first punch in the current crisis by accusing the US of maintaining biowarfare facilities on Ukrainian soil. The US hit back, saying Putin intends to use bioweapons of his own, and the allegation is just cover fire for his own insidious intentions. Proof 5. Isolation through airspace. With several nations closing their airspace to Russia, the sense of geographic isolation has heightened dramatically in the first few weeks of the Ukraine invasion. With few flights in and out of Russia, the alienation of a superpower is palpable, and in many ways is even more than how it was during the Cold War. Proof 6. Moscow unplugged from global economy. The crippling sanctions against Russia haven't slowed Putin's military rumble in Ukraine, but Russian citizens are most definitely feeling the heat. A Soviet-era arrogance that Russia can survive without the global economy is also representative of Cold War-era confidence. The suggestion that the world needs Russia more than Russia needs the world. Proof 7. Mass mobilization across Europe. Perhaps the most visible manifestation of a new Cold War, the readiness of militaries in Europe, across NATO nations, and the move of several other countries like Finland to consider joining NATO, creating a spectre of the Russian menace. The suggestion that it's Ukraine today and the other countries next, painting a scary Cold War scenario that goes just beyond the cold. There's real combat taking place in Ukraine for a whole month and counting. One thing is certain, whenever that battle ends, Cold War 2.0 won't end anytime soon. With Shivaru, Bureau Report, India Today.
Gaurav, coming back to you now on, the possible triggers that could convert this Cold War that's happening into an all-out kind of war where NATO actually gets involved. When you were down there on the ground, Gaurav, you were personal witness to consignments of NATO equipment coming in to arm the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian soldiers, the government officials, the leadership that you were speaking to have all been saying the thing they desire the most is a more direct action from the neighbors, something that the Russians have seen as a direct red line. Do you see that changing at all? Do you see that red line being crossed at all, Gaurav?
So there certainly is an escalation in terms of weapons that the NATO countries are now providing. Remember, initially, there was a lot of reluctance to provide fighter jets. Poland refused to do that. But now MiG-29 fighter jets, cannibalized MiG-29s, at least for now, they are being provided. Slovakia has provided the S-300 systems. Initially, they were not being provided. Ukraine is asking for longer range artillery, 155mm howitzers. That's the red line. Tanks, again, the Czech Republic is providing some tanks. That's a red line. Fighter jets, tanks, howitzers, S-300 systems, these are all now being provided, and Ukraine is asking for much more. They're saying if you give us longer range weapons, we can turn this defensive battle into an offensive battle. That's the red line. Shiv, one real threat that the West is now grappling with. Russia has the largest number of nuclear warheads, more than 6,500 nuclear warheads, including tactical nuclear warheads, and that's a nightmarish scenario for any situation. So in case, again, a major trigger point would be Finland and Sweden joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because that would once again bring this nuclear threshold much, much closer as far as Russia is concerned. That's an existential threat as far as Russia is concerned, and that is where we could, God forbid, see a major escalation.
And is that escalation coming, in your view, Geeta, from Moscow's side? Because they've made it clear that existential threat, is going to be that big red line as far as taking this completely to the next level, whether nuclear or whatever else. But, Sweden and Finland joining NATO, NATO becoming more directly involved. obviously Russia would have war-gamed all these possibilities, but is this a button that Russia is willing to push, escalate things to an even larger extent beyond what is currently happening?
Well, the bigger point over here, Shiv, is the fact that while we see the United States of America and the West coming out and supporting Ukraine and sending in ammo and weapons, the determining factor or the country that will determine escalation is certainly going to be Russia, because Russia is the one reading into what is happening in Ukraine and has been doing that for a while. So it's not just about whether if Sweden or Finland are looking at NATO, whether if the weapons and ammunition continue to come into Ukraine, that certainly is now considered an escalation, Shiv. The parameters for escalation is also changing in Moscow. And one very important aspect is the fact that President Zelensky and his officials have now started talking about the fact that Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons and it was a futile exercise. And that they're revisiting the entire idea of nuclear. That certainly is one of the biggest concerns Russia has. And if that conversation continues from Zelensky's side, from the Ukrainian authorities' side, then that certainly will also be a trigger for escalation.
And things are very volatile. Geeta, in fact, has just, gotten an exclusive comment from the United Nations Secretary General as well on the need for an independent investigation into perceived war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. The hackles have been raised, as it were. Things are volatile. The mood is aggressive at this point of time. There is a sense of frustration after 2 months of this combat about certain military objectives not having been met. So is all this bluster really about frustration, or is it a true indicator of what could come? What Gaurav and Geeta have basically given us is a clear picture of where those red lines are and where the pieces could actually fall. And as you can see, it's a scary picture the way we're telling it. Thanks very much, Geeta. Thanks, Gaurav, for joining me on this big story. Now, seen as weak and puny before this invading superpower, Ukraine's fight back, let's face it, has been legendary. Of course, they've gotten a lot of help with advanced weapons, sensors, intelligence, satellite imagery, and the works from NATO and its neighboring countries. But this small nation has held its own in the face of overwhelming Russian power, bleeding Putin's fearsome army, digging a graveyard for Russian jets, choppers, and tanks. With a steadfast support from the West, Ukraine's civilians have turned mean fighting machines and defenders of hope. But let's remember, they've been doing this now into their 3rd month, and amidst a country where most cities are lying in ruins.
Civilians training to pick up guns to fight for their country. Fathers and mothers with their teenage children take turns to learn how to operate machine guns.
We would like to watch and learn how to use arms to protect our children.
Ukraine has been training its citizens since the first week of March. They are all preparing for a lengthy war.
I believe that it is just in case, and I won't need this knowledge, but in case like the Russian invasion move further to Lviv, or maybe in case they will launch some missiles to Lviv, and maybe I would join some medical, medicine stuff, and do medicine.
While ordinary Ukrainians train and prepare to defend their country, the world has gradually but steadily been helping the defender. Faced with the mighty aggressor, Ukraine looks severely out of favor from a military point of view. Yet a country with just 2 lakh active military personnel has been able to stand up to a behemoth Russian army that has sophisticated weaponry at its command. A large part of that fierce resistance comes from the swift transfer of military equipment by NATO and other allied countries. In a first, the 27-country bloc of the European Union signed off a $551 million package to help arm Ukraine. Germany has rewritten its long-standing policy that barred exporting weapons into war zones. Germany sent 1,000 anti-tank weapons, 500 Stinger anti-craft defense systems to Ukraine. Within days of the invasion, France reportedly promised to send military aid to Ukraine, but there's no publicly disclosed specifics of it. The United Kingdom has so far sent 2,000 short-range and anti-tank missiles, Saxon armoured vehicles and Sky Sabre air defense system with 100 military operators. The US so far has been the largest contributor with 1,400 Stinger anti-aircraft missile systems, 4,600 Javelin anti-tank missiles, 5 Mi-17 helicopters, 3 patrol boats, 4 counter-artillery and counter-drone tracking radars, 2,000 light anti-armor weapons, 300 grenade launchers and ammunition. They've also sent 600 shotguns and 600 machine guns, 5,000 rifles, 1,000 pistols, 25,000 sets of body armor, 25,000 helmets. The US has so far sent nearly 40 million rounds of small arms ammunition, over 1 million grenades, mortar and artillery rounds, along with 70 Humvees and other vehicles, 6,000 at 4 anti-armor systems and 1,000 switchable drones.
I'm grateful to US President Biden for new effective aid for our country. You should understand that I can't reveal all the details of this package of aid and others. This is our defense tactic when the enemy doesn't know what to expect from us.
Justin Trudeau has been the next big military aid contributor in arming Ukraine after Joe Biden. Canada has sent nearly 4,500 M72 rocket launchers, 1,600 fragmentation vests, nearly 7,500 hand grenades. Other than that, it has also contributed $1 million to buy commercial satellite high-resolution and modern imagery, machine guns, pistols and carbines. Canada has sent 1.5 million rounds of ammunition, sniper rifles and various related equipment worth $7.9 million to Ukraine so far. It has also contributed $19.9 million in military aid that could include helmets, body armor, gas masks and night vision gears. From Asia, Japan has sent bulletproof vests and helmets to Ukraine, and South Korea too has contributed to the war effort. The next door neighbor for both Russia and Ukraine, Poland has reportedly contributed tens of thousands of shells and artillery ammunition, anti-aircraft missiles, light mortars and reconnaissance drones. All 3 Baltic and Scandinavian countries too have contributed with military aid to arm Ukraine, as has other European countries. Australia and New Zealand have come with major military donations for Ukraine. But for now, all this help from around the world has not been able to convince Putin's army to back down. The war continues and destruction abounds.